Hello and welcome back to another day in the arena. It's me, it's CGB, and welcome to your bonus content as members and supporters of the CGB family. If you're watching this, it means that you gave money on Patreon, on Twitch, or you joined on YouTube. Regardless of how you supported the channel financially, thank you so much for doing so. I'm really looking forward to giving you my read on the rest of the format, the rest of the cards. I'm going to be skipping cards that I don't think are standard constructed playable because, well, there's a lot of cards to read and time, of course, is limited. So if I miss a card and you want me to talk about it, you want my opinion, please join my Discord and send me a message there. You can also leave comments on this video or comments in the community post on Facebook, and I will try to read them all. If you leave them all over the darn place, it may take me a time to get to all of them. That's why I prefer Discord the most in the subsection, but regardless, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. As supporters of my channel, it's the least I can do. Let's get into it and talk about some more of the Spark cards. We're going to start in the color combination white, and like I said, I'm going to be looking only for the constructed playable cards. First up, we have Charmed Stray. Did I mention the constructed playable cards? But it's a kitty. What a cute kitty. And of course, there's the beautiful curve of Turn 1, Charm Stray. Turn 2, Charm Stray. Charm Stray. At 6 lifelink, power, and toughness on turn 2. That sounds a little bit special, and I probably won't be trying to do that, but maybe there's some cat tribal to be had somewhere for funsies. Maybe you'll see it in a fun deck, and then we'll run Mirror Image, and we'll also run the other clone cards in the set. Anyway, quasi-duplicate Charm Stray. Obviously, that is a deck we will do. Obviously. Now on to serious business at common. This is Defiant Strike. For 1 white instant speed, you get target creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn and draw a card. You're going to want 4 of these, and you're going to want 4 of these quickly. That Feather deck, Feather the Redeemed that I'm talking about, and also the other heroic style effect on a card that's really hard to recall the name of. Well, pretty good. Pretty good. In fact, I bet I can pull it up if the editor cuts this little pause I have to give. There we go. 10th District Legionnaire. This is the card you want to combine Defiant Strike with, along with Feather the Redeemed, which I bet I can also get up here for you. Come on over, Feather. Yep. So this is why Defiant Strike suddenly has a place in life. When you target the 10th District Legionnaire, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and you scry. That's a bit of value, and you get to draw a card. And if you have Feather the Redeemed, you get the Defiant Strike back at end of turn to do again and again and again and keep your hand full. And that is what is extremely, extremely exciting about Defiant Strike. Finale of Glory is a sorcery, X white, mythic rare. Create X 2/2 white soldier creature tokens with vigilance. If X is 10 or more, also create X 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance. Oh my god. So if you get 12 mana together to cast this, you can have a ton of angels and a ton of soldiers. On its own, the rate isn't completely embarrassing. So if you play this for, say, 5 total mana, you get 6 2/2 white soldier tokens with vigilance. Not the worst. It's very good as a mana payoff. The problem is, where do we get a deck that really wants a few bodies on the battlefield, but also makes a good amount of mana? Some people could see this as a finisher for control decks. I don't see it that way. I think it's a counterspell or a sweeper away from sadness, therefore not a resilient finisher that we need. However, maybe there is a one-of potential in certain decks like green-white tokens, or heck, maybe even white aggro needs exactly one of these for when they draw it late in the game to be their own style of Banefire. That doesn't sound very likely to me. What is interesting is taking these finale cards, of which we'll cover the full cycle here today, and combining them with Teferi. Let's get Teferi on the screen if we can find our favorite Azorius Planeswalker. When I make this stuff up on the spot, it's pretty hard, but let's pull you up, buddy. Each opponent can cast spells only when they can cast a sorcery, but +1 until near next turn you may cast sorcery spells as though they had flash. Flashing in these finale effects really increases the power level tremendously. Being able to play these at instant speed while having other options and being more surprising could definitely change the strength level on these cards. And as if we didn't already like Teferi, as if Teferi wasn't good enough, well, here you go. How about an instant speed Finale of Glory for a ton of mana? Now throw Wilderness Reclamation onto the fire, and you've got some absolute shenanigans. Gideon Blackblade is 1 white legendary planeswalker, mythic rare, comes in with 4 loyalty. As long as it's your turn, Gideon Blackblade is a 4/4 human soldier creature with indestructible that is still a planeswalker. +1, up to 1 other target creature you control gains your choice of vigilance, lifelink, or indestructible until end of turn. And -6, exile target non-land permanent. The -6 is pretty window dressing like. It won't come up often, I don't think, because Gideon is an interesting card, but he seems to want to play most with other creatures. When he comes down, he can plus to help out another creature, and then it's that creature's job to protect him. The indestructibility on that creature, however, is only until end of turn. So it makes it awkward, as the opponent can probably attack Gideon very well. Where I think Gideon is going to shine dramatically is one, when you are very far ahead on the battlefield, so that protecting him is not an issue, and 2, where you are against control, somebody who cannot turn around and attack Gideon. This might be a solid sideboard against control, and on the latter, this might be a one of maybe 2 of the most in the white aggro deck. I don't know if it's better than the other 3-drops in white, like Benalish Marshal and History of Benalia, and we already have great cards, such as Unbreakable Formation. But Gideon Blackblade certainly could have a spot, as it is immune to sweepers and adds a significant amount of power to the other creatures. Giving something indestructible so it can crash in and not worry about trades, as well as lifelink, so that it can win a race, is a big deal, especially against red. So I expect to craft or open 1, maybe 2 of these, and we'll probably start 1 in the sideboard, 1 in the deck, and see where it goes from there. Gideon's Company is a human soldier 3/3 for 3 and a white. It's an uncommon. Whenever you gain life, put 2 +1/+1 counters on Gideon's Company. For 4 mana, put a loyalty counter on target Gideon planeswalker. For the Legion, for Ravnica. Great speech, dude. I mean, dude, you're no Aragorn, but he's trying over here. So I don't think this card is actually constructed playable. I wouldn't use it in any deck other than fun, but I know that those of you who love Ajani's Pridemate and the Soul Brothers type decks with Ajani's Welcome are going to love this card as another Pridemate-esque payoff for those decks that simply gets huge by gaining life. So I know I'm going to see this card, and I know some of you are going to play it. The deck might be a fun one-of for me, but it shouldn't be a competitive endeavor for the serious battler. Just so you know, I would stay off ladder with Gideon's Company. Gideons Triumph is 1 and a white for an instant, uncommon. Target opponent sacrifices a creature that attacked or blocked this turn. If you control a Gideon Planeswalker, that player sacrifices 2 of those creatures instead. Well, this is a huge payoff for running that Gideon and making it your win con against a creature deck that tries to attack it to death. If you can set it up so that when they attack the Gideon, you play a Gideon's Triumph and make them sacrifice 2 attacking creatures, it's a very, very, very brutal turn of events. Absolutely insane. On its own, target opponent sacrifices a creature that attacked or blocked this turn is a pretty good effect. It's interesting because it can be played after combat. Most of these type of effects, like Celestial Flare, you would have to play in the combat step, usually before any damage was even done. And the opponent could choose their worst creature, sacrifice it, and then you'd block accordingly. In this case, you can set your blocks, kill some things with the blocks, and play the Gideon's Triumph at end of turn, possibly after holding up a counterspell throughout the rest of the turn. Or just wait till after combat, or if they attack with 1 creature, then you can just make them sacrifice that creature right away. It's a bit more flexible than this card usually is. I don't think it's a 4 of. It's probably a 1 or a 2 of that I'm going to test out in my control decks to throw a little curveball at the opponent. And we'll see how it goes from there. But it's a very playable card, and it's a different kind of effect, and it's going to be obnoxious to play around something like Gideon's Triumph and Settle the Wreckage on a regular basis. Mythic Rare God Eternal O Katra. No, Katniss, don't do it! 3 white legendary creature zombie god with double strike. And it's 3/6, just as O Katra was on Amonkhet. Whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 4/4 black zombie warrior creature token with vigilance. Vigilant zombie warrior creature tokens. Holy crap, for every creature spell. When it dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, you may put it into its owner's library, 3rd from the top. So this will be our first god that we're checking in on. This ability that when it dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, you may put it into owner's library, 3rd from the top, is an interesting ability. Something I've already seen when some people were testing with this card was that it got exiled by hostage taker. The opponent can choose to put it back into the library rather than let the hostage taker take it away. Pretty interesting little interaction there. The double strike, of course, is nice. Hits like a 6/6 for 5 mana. But how about whenever you cast a creature spell? That's a huge ability. So here's the thing. 5 mana is a lot. We have the Wolf, Friend to Elves card. We have Tristani. We have Lyra Dawnbringer. We have Vivian Reed. We have a number of amazing 5 cost cards. Where does this fit? And what kind of deck? We have to be in a pretty significantly heavy creature deck. So what heavy creature deck gets to turn 5 and says, I need something extra? I feel like this card is missing a home. The power level is certainly there. If you get there and play it and start playing other things, obviously you will dominate the board, and the opponent removing it is just going to come back and do more shenanigans later. So what's the deck? That's the problem I have right now. I don't see which deck this card slots into, and because of that, I'm unlikely to craft it early on. I think we'd need somewhere between 15, we need like 20 some creatures. We would need it to be able to get up to 5 mana, so probably something along a Llanowar Elf type of variety or an Explorer type variety, and we'd need to want it more than we want Lyra, Vivian Reed, and many of the cards I just named. So I'm not sure about God Eternal O Katra. I think it might just be hanging out for a while until we can find exactly where a card like this should be. But look at it this way. It's like Divine Visitation, but instead of an enchantment that does nothing on the board, it actually comes down and shuts things down on its own. That's really good. So maybe there's an Aristocrats type deck or a deck with a bunch of small creatures like Hunted Witness and things like that that wants to take those cards that are so important early but so bad late and turn them into something better. Maybe that is where the God Eternal O Katra belongs. Ignite the Beacon for 5 mana, 4 and a white. It is an instant, thank God. Rare. Search your library for up to 2 Planeswalker cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, and shuffle your library. I can't imagine that you would want to do this instead of just play one of your Planeswalkers. Yeah, I am not a fan of this card. I'm sure some of you are going to be screaming, Super Friends. I often look down on tutors. The flexibility, at least it's a 2-for-1. It is like 5 mana, draw 2 of the best cards in your deck, you could say. But it's not necessarily that. Now, you can grab a toolbox of Planeswalkers so that you have the right one for the right moment. Maybe there's something to it. This is not a card I'm excited about or plan to play right away, but I'm sure some of you will. This is a card that's going to have to prove itself before I really step anywhere near it, as I'd prefer to spend my 5 mana on the Planeswalker itself, not on putting more Planeswalkers into my hand. Usually a Planeswalker is wow enough. Let's talk about another rare and wild card, Parhelion II. 6 white. Legendary Artifact Vehicle Rare. Flying. First Strike. Vigilance. 5/5. Whenever Parhelion 2 attacks, create 2 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance that are attacking. Crew 4. Holy stat ball. So, if you do ever get to attack with this, you're attacking for 13 vigilant damage. Holy crap. And those Vigilant Angels you make can crew it so that it plays defense as well. This is 8 mana. It's too much. There's probably some fun to be had somewhere, and maybe there's a way to cheat an artifact onto the battlefield or fetch an artifact from your deck that we could look at. But it's just too much. And therefore, I won't be crafting it. I probably won't be playing with it until we make some really bizarre Angel Tribal deck to sort of give a go with something like this. But no, it's not for me. I know I'm a bit of a downer when it comes to exciting cards like this. The amount of stats this thing puts out can certainly end the game if the opponent doesn't have the right answer. But man, how about that Boros branding on the front, though? They sure know how to put up a logo. Strike fear into the hearts of the enemy. Have fun, whoever gets to get their Hellion online soonest. Have a really good time. Won't be me, but I do wish you the very best. Prison Realm is 2 and white for an enchantment. Uncommon. When Prison Realm enters the battlefield, exile target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls until Prison Realm leaves the battlefield. When Prison Realm enters the battlefield, scry 1. So, an Oblivion Ring type effect, it can only target creatures or planeswalkers an opponent controls, so it's very flexible. Where does a card like this fit with all the options, the great options that we have in Standard right now and in Best of 1? Well, it goes in a deck with too many 4s, a deck that can't play Ixalan's Binding very reliably. It goes in a deck that doesn't have many creatures to activate Conclave Tribunal and make their Conclave Tribunal cheaper. A deck that kind of strikes me as being that style would be Boros Angels. I feel like this can fit, like 2 or 3 copies could fit into the Boros Angel curve pretty well with Prison Realm. That way, so yeah, I don't know that Boros Angels will be a very significant deck in the next format, and it may look dramatically different, but I'm just giving you an example of where this card could fit as an option, even though it isn't quite as powerful as an Ixalan's Binding or Conclave Tribunal. Some decks, when they're beating down, all that they care about is whether or not they can get that planeswalker or that creature right off the field, easy peasy, and a scry 1 can matter a lot to a deck trying to curve out. So we're looking at some very interesting takes on mid-range probably for Prison Realm, and I think that's about it. Ravnica at War, a sorcery rare that exiles all multicolored permanents for the price of 3 and a white. This card is interesting in that we haven't really had a card around other than like something absurdly expensive like Star of Extinction that could bring you back from a situation where your opponent has, say, a Dovin and a Kaya and a Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, all on the board at the same time. And with the amount of planeswalkers coming in and the amount of multicolored permanents in the format, this is a card to keep an eye on. It's most likely a sideboard card, almost certainly. I don't think you could really play it in Best of 1, but it is a card that you could sideboard for, say, your mono white deck that could really hammer certain types of decks. So keep your eyes on Ravnica at War. It will be a metagame call. Things will have to break exactly the right way, but at some point you may be really happy to have one of these in your sideboard. Oh, and if you're a Best of 1 deck with Mastermind's Acquisition, this seems like a really nice bullet to be able to fetch. In a similar vein to Ravnica at War, single combat also lets you catch up from very, very far gone board states. For 3 white, this sorcery is rare, and each player chooses a creature or planeswalker they control. I choose the Hound, and then sacrifices the rest. They choose the Mountain. Clegane Bowl. Anyway, Game of Thrones references if you missed it. Players can't cast creature or planeswalker spells until the end of your next turn. So that's an interesting little clause. Until the end of your next turn means they can't even cast creature or planeswalker spells if they had flash over the next turn cycle. Now, when you think about this card, yes, they get to keep their very best creature or their very best planeswalker, but so do you. And you could, for example, if you have a Teferi on the battlefield, you could cast single combat and then Teferi minus on what's left over. Something of that nature. Augur Bolus, same kind of deal. The reason I'm more optimistic about this than I was the first time I read it is the same kind of story. It's the opponent could have 20 things on the battlefield. You could have 1, but after you cast this, it's going to be mono y mono. A big Sultai board with 1 million Wild Growth Walkers could get down to a single Carnage Tyrant taking on your single Carnage Tyrant. And that's, that could be really exciting. So there are places where this feels like a tragic arrogance. The fact that they have to get rid of all their creatures if they want to keep a planeswalker, or all their planeswalkers if they want to keep a creature, is also interesting. And they have to take a turn off from rebuilding, which means you get the first shot at rebuilding. So I suspect single combat is better than it looks and might be a really strong card for mid-range mirrors, a really good Masterminds acquisition target, and I look forward to seeing where this shows up. But I expect, especially early in the format, this will result in some significantly huge blowouts. The Wanderer is 3 and a white. It is a legendary planeswalker uncommon. Prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to you and other permanents you control. For a -2, exile target creature with power 4 or greater, 5 starting loyalty. So, preventing all non-combat damage that would be dealt to you and other permanents you control is interesting. It can turn off cards like Deafening Clarion and Solar Blaze for good, as well as anything else that deals X damage to whatever. It turns off Star of Extinction even. The fact that prevents it to you and all other permanents means that Banefire also doesn't really work here. It's interesting because there are probably decks out there with some kind of burnout component or things of that nature that this could come down and completely hose, which makes it sound like a sideboard card. The minus ability is also very sideboard-esque. Exiling a creature with power of 4 or greater is... Not every deck is doing that all the time, but a good amount are. It's interesting that the deck that goes really low, mono red, this prevents all non-combat damage, which can be a real tilt for mono red. Against decks that go bigger, like mono green, the -2 is very useful. Maybe there's a place for this in Best of 1. What kind of a deck wants this? Probably just about anything you could classify in mid-range, and probably a sideboard card more than that, but I definitely want to play with the card. It may not turn out to be good enough. Its immediate impact on the board isn't great, and the -2 only hits certain types of things, so you're going to want to play it around things that come up the board, like the Explore package. But in places where this is good, I can see it being really good, and I want to play with it more to find out just how good it is. I expect to craft 2 of them and put them in a number of mid-range decks with white component, and see just what all we get out of the Wanderer. Tomic Distinguished Advocist, white, 2/3, legendary human advisor rare, flying. Lands on the battlefield and lands in graveyards can't be the targets of spells or abilities your opponents control. Your opponents can't play land cards from graveyards. So for some reason, we're turning off Crucible of Worlds. All that fun is over with. What else targets lands? How about a card like Gift of Paradise? I guess you can shut down a Gift of Paradise. Read this again. So I guess Field of Ruin and Memorial to War are turned off. Star of Extinction is completely countered. These are all very fringe scenarios, and probably not things that are really going to matter too much in the long run. I think in Standard, 99% of this card is white, 2/3 flyer, and I think those stats are pretty good. You only need to get like 1+1/+1 counter on this with an Unbreakable formation or an Elephant to take it out of Lightning Strike range, and I think that flying with more toughness is completely legit. The body is fine, and I'll probably play, because it's legendary, one of these in my white aggro deck. I don't know if you can ever afford to draw 2, but when looking at our 2-drops, I like it a little more than Tithe Taker. I probably like it more than Adanto Vanguard, as there are a lot of exile things coming out in this format and things that shut down the Vanguard. So I'm willing to craft or open Atomic and throw it into a deck. This is another interesting case where we just have a 1-of. The other things to watch out for Atomic is it is a 2-mana legend, and it's not a bad one. That means cards like Mox Amber and anything that triggers with Historic might be a little more relevant with Atomic. So if you are finally looking to brew a little harder with Historic and Legendary interactions, this may be a card you want to keep an eye on. Augur Bolus is a reprint, and it is an amazing one. This is a Merfolk Wizard for 1 and a blue. It is an uncommon for a 1/3 body. When Augur Bolus enters the battlefield, look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal an instant or sorcery card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. This card is very good. It will whiff some amount of times. I can't wait for people who say, hey, CGB, you said this card was good. I played it twice, 3 times even, in a row. I never once drew a card with it. Well, you do have to run enough instant or sorcery cards to make the hits reasonable. Obviously, if you have 20 instants or sorceries in your deck, so 1 out of every 3 cards, you're giving yourself a shot, but there will still be a pretty high fail ratio. Sometimes you will hit nothing. The bright side is you spent 2 mana on a 1/3 body, which can slow the opponent down and let you set up. This card mostly exists in control and combo decks, and isn't really for anything that is creatures or mid-range very often. So please keep that in mind, and understand, yes, you will whiff. Does this mean the card is bad? No, because anytime you can, for 2 mana, play a 1/3 that selects a very good card and puts it into your hand, slows the opponent down, and then helps you control the game, you're in a good position. I think this card is specifically here to get us to stop playing creatureless Esper control. That said, you don't have to run 4. A lot of people run 4 because they know how strong the card was in previous blocks, but every Augur that you run makes it harder to hit those spells with your Augur. I think 3 or 2 wouldn't be the worst idea, as it increases the likelihood that you'll hit spells instead of other Augurs when using your Augur Bolus. So keep your spell count high, play your Augur on 2, and enjoy the rewards, and don't tilt when you whiff. Commence the Endgame is 4 blue instant rare. This spell can't be countered. Draw 2 cards, then amass X, where X is the number of cards in your hand. Oh yeah, this is a card that gets better the longer I think about it. For one thing, it can't be countered, which means you put a threat on the battlefield despite whether or not the opponent is holding a counter spell. I feel like we need more spells like this in Standard, as counter spells have gotten to a little bit of a breaking point where they can be a bit too good. But certain cards are fighting back, Banefire among them, Niv Mizzet among them, but Commence the Endgame, being able to be played in other blue decks, does sort of push exactly the end game. Let's get a threat on the battlefield and start attacking it. Let's stop these counter standoffs and move things towards a conclusion. Imagine the Mythic Invitational with Commence the Endgame. At its worst, its absolute worst, where this is the last card in your hand, you're drawing 2 cards and making a 2/2 that can block or trade with a threat on the battlefield to buy you time to use those cards. At the best, playing this and going up to 7 or more cards, making a giant zombie creature that can block and kill the opponent's best thing, or start turning the corner and attacking the opponent, or slam their planeswalker into the ground after they've tapped out to cast a planeswalker. This is a really sweet card. I don't know if it's a 4 of. Some people compare it to Torrential Gearhulk because you draw 2 cards and get a body, an uncounterable Gearhulk, you could say. Maybe. Gearhulk was much more flexible. But I like Commence the Endgame. I don't know if it's a 4 of. I think it's probably a 2 of to start with. But I wouldn't be surprised if this became a 4 of, and the real MVP of what will be the future of control decks in the new Standard. So I'm really hyped for Commence the Endgame. Is one of the, it might be, I would probably put it in the top 5 cards in the set for impact it could have, and I don't think that the fail state on it is very high. The only way this card goes terribly wrong and you never play it anywhere is if the format is just so aggressive everything's over by turn 6. But even in an aggressive format, there will be a control deck to fight it, and in the sideboard you will want things to fight other control decks. So hence, we will be commencing the endgame. Philithid the Lost, I don't know what I'm supposed to say, F's in chat for this name, is 1 in a blue for a legendary homunculus rare 1/1. When the Lost enters the battlefield, draw a card. Okay, fair enough. If it entered from your library or was cast from your library, draw 2 cards instead. When becomes the target of a spell, shuffle into the owner's library. One card that makes look very nice is Neoform. When you get this card out of your deck with Neoform, you immediately draw 2 cards. And if something happens to this little guy, it goes back into the deck, and you can fetch it again later, turning your 1-drops, such as Llanowar Elves or Pelt Collector, or I don't know, maybe one of those 1-mana 0/3 plants. I don't know what to tell you. You can then cash those in for 2 cards over and over whenever you have a Neoform. Another card that works well with it is one that we have yet to find, but is a Green Sun Zenith style reprint that can hit creatures of any color. So pulling this out of your deck and drawing 2 cards at a pretty low cost is a pretty nice trick to have access to. So this is going to be something that gets crafted. I'm not sure how many. It is legendary, keep that in mind. Once again, things that go with Mox Amber, things that trigger historic, make this card look very good. Tashar and this card might be very good. There is a number of pretty cool things I want to do with this card. I wouldn't be surprised if I ended up crafting 4 very early on in the format. How about in competitive decks? Is there a competitive place for this? Not in current shells. If there is a competitive home for this creature, it will be a new style of deck, something we haven't had in the previous format. And I certainly hope that exists, because we could use some new decks in this format. Not gonna lie, I'm looking for some spice. The finale of Revelation is X and blue for sorcery. Mythic Rare. Draw X cards. If X is 10 or more, instead shuffle your graveyard into your library. Draw X cards, untap up to 5 lands, and you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. Exile. Finale of Revelation. If you are looking for a way to shuffle your graveyard back into your deck, forget Gaia's Blessing, forget Clear the Mind. Just play a Finale of Revelation for 10. Draw 10 cards and shuffle up. That's what I like to see. Now, is this card actually that good? I don't believe so. I think that what you're going to need is effects such as Teferi and Wilderness Reclamation to ramp it up to huge numbers, and maybe you could run one of these in your control deck as a super late game effect. That sorcery speed clause is a problem in current Magic, and when you could be running Commence the Endgame and have that be uncounterable and instant speed, it strikes me as much better typically than the Finale of Revelation, whereas the place where you'll normally get to with a card like this is late in the game against another controlled deck. It is possible against mid-range decks that are not blue, and therefore not playing cards like Negate. You might want to board in a Finale of Revelation to bury them in cards later in the game, and to reset your deck size. This is the kind of card that makes Mardu control look like an absolute joke, because at some point the opponent will draw 10 cards, reshuffle their whole deck, and be right back to making you go through hell and eventually deck you. So I think there's a place for the Revelation in very specific matchups. We're talking sideboard, we're talking Mastermind's acquisition target. I will be opening or crafting only one to see how it plays, but it is not, to me, inspiring something new and completely amazing. Maybe somebody will prove me wrong with their Teferi Wilderness Reclamation Finale of Revelation deck, but I'll remain skeptical until I see it. Kefnet God Eternal has all the makings of a card that could really matter in the format. At 2 blue, this legendary zombie creature god at Mythic Rare is a 4/5 flyer. Now, when you may reveal the first card you draw each turn as you draw it. Now, keep in mind that applies to your opponent's turn as well, if you're using an Opt or a Chemist's Insight. Whenever you reveal an instant or sorcery card this way, copy that card, and you may cast the copy. The copy costs 2 less to cast. Now, keep in mind this card still goes to your hand. So this is sort of like if you draw a Chemist's Insight, you may pay 2 mana to draw 2 cards, and you get to keep the Chemist's Insight you just drew for later. Now, when the Kefnet God Eternal dies or is put into exile, you may put it into its owner's library 3rd from the top. So, do we finally have a creature that can be the win con that we need? The power of the God Eternals and their put them back into the library clause will probably lead to some interesting ways of dealing with these types of cards. Are we going to see main deck deep freeze for cards like God Eternal? There are probably some other ways of dealing with them that don't require such a thing, but deep freeze kind of comes to mind as the ridiculous stuff that could sneak in to play around this last ability. This can be a very good finisher for the control decks. Esper, Jeskai, whatever you want, really. Casting a bonus Thought Erasure and then Thought Erasing them again sounds pretty lovely. There's so many good things with this. Now, don't do it so much for the line of text about copying cards. That is very good. But even in a spell-heavy deck, you can't expect that more than about once out of every 3 draw steps. So a little bit of variance in there. You're probably going to whiff sometimes when you really, really don't want to. It's going to make those top deck lands you don't want even worse. What I really like is 5 toughness. The Lava Coil will not kill it. The Rekindling Phoenix cannot get through it. There's just a lot going on when you can pay 4 mana and have a 4/5. A hasty Skargan Hellkite will smash right into it, as well as a Gruul Spellbreaker. So it's a very good body for the cost, and the fact that you draw another one very soon if they actually do bother to kill it will eventually run them out of removal. I like this card. I'll probably craft 2. I don't think, despite all of the stats and abilities, that it is a 3 of. The fact that you get it back a few turns later makes it even less likely that you really want to have that many in your hand, as you can probably see the opponent kill it, cast Chemist's Insight, and then redraw it and play it again the next turn. So, the God Eternal Kefnet might be in my top 10 for the set. I doubt it would quite make the top 5. I like that there's a creature that I feel like I want to play in Esper Control now. I've felt for quite some time that all the creatures were just too bad and too vulnerable to run in that deck, and because of that, you end up with Teferi games that last a million years. Contrary to popular belief, not all control mages like their Teferi games lasting this way. They are just willing to do what they need to win the game. And I would like to have a creature that I could cast, have in the deck, and feel confident that it will end the game, not just simply die to my opponent's Vraska's Contempt. Jace's Triumph is a divination reprint, 2 and a blue for draw 2 cards. If you control a Jace Planeswalker, draw 3 cards instead. The problem right now is that the Jace Planeswalkers are very bad. I'm sorry, it's true. Sexy Jace, Jace Arcane Strategist, and maybe a card we'll talk about next. None of them really do it for me. And because of that, this is divination and nothing more. Therefore, I'm not looking to cast Jace's Triumph anytime soon in a format with great cards like Chemist's Insight and Commence the Endgame. I spoiled myself on this one, but I do not like Jace Wielder of Mysteries very much. Jace Wielder of Mysteries is 1 and 3 blue, so pretty tough mana cost. It is a legendary Planeswalker Jace. It is rare. If you would draw a card from your library while you have no cards in it, you will win the game instead. Target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard to draw a card. That's a +1. There is 4 loyalty at the start. -8, draw 7 cards. Then, if your library has no cards in it, you win the game. So, there's some problems with this. It doesn't do anything to defend itself. At 4 mana, you can get a number of cards that draw cards and help produce additional value. An example of one is Experimental Frenzy, to give you an idea of the power level you can expect at 4 mana. Chemist's Insight immediately gives you 2 cards. This gives you 1. Chemist's Insight then flashes back for 2 more cards. The next turn, this gives you 1. The thing about Jace that I like is the alt win con. Now, in serious, spiky, competitive games of Magic, that's not a big deal, most likely ever. However, when it comes to some jank tank brews and having some fun, the Jace Wielder of Mysteries, I've already got some insane decks in my mind that use Jace Wielder of Mysteries, Smothering Tithe, Emergency Powers, the Blue Finale, and a Jace to like one-shot draw our deck and win the game. So I've got evil plans for Jace, the Wielder of Mysteries. I'm looking forward to seeing exactly how that all plays out. It will be fun. We will have a good time, but we will not get too spiky with this card. And because of that, I'm probably not going to craft more than 1. I'm most likely to open 1 anyway, since it's a rare, not a mythic. So I'm probably not going to spend my hard-earned rare wildcards on Jace, the Wielder of Mysteries. I don't think that Kaz Minas Enigmatic Mentor, the Planeswalker, is a very good card, but this card, Kaz Minas Transmutation, for 1 and a blue, is an enchantment aura at common. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and has base power and toughness 1/1. So there's always problems with enchantments that basically jail creatures. If the enchantment dies, the creature comes back and it's better than ever. When it's an aura, that's slightly worse because the creature immediately regains its ability and it's like it has haste since it can go right back to smashing face. That said, the Transmutation is one of the cards that I look at and say, well, this might be one of those cards that you need because of the new wording on the God Eternals. The fact that those gods get put back into their deck if you kill them means you don't really want to kill or exile them. So how do we make it into an insignificant card on the battlefield? How about a card like Kaz Minas Transmutation? It also might be a good card in mono blue, as mono blue really doesn't have any 1 toughness creatures without evasion. So this is like a 2-mana Doomblade for mono blue tempo if that deck continues to exist. In best of 1, you don't really know if you're ever going to play against a creature deck. You might play against control decks, which makes it hard to have cards like this in it. But in best of 3, as a sideboard card, I could see this being a 2, possibly even 3 of in the whole 75 for a number of different style of decks that lack clean removal in most situations. Lassiter Plating is 1 and a blue for an instant uncommon. Amass 1. You and permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn. So, I have to bring this up for a few reasons. I'm not sure if it's actually good. 2 mana for 1 and it counters like a removal spell of some kind or a burn spell target at your face or thought erasure. That might be good enough. It depends, I think, how much you can get out of Amass. Are you using other Amass creatures, or do you have a way to pay off making that token? One thing I want to point out is that this card, for 2 mana, it can counter a Banefire of any size. If you give yourself hexproof, even though Banefire can't be countered and the damage can't be prevented, hexproof is completely different. When you are hexproof, something that was targeting you on the stack fizzles. So for 2 mana, blue has a counter target Banefire, and it can counter a Banefire that targets a Teferi as well. I wouldn't be surprised if this was some kind of a sneaky sideboard card. And it might be even better than that. I want to try it in the mono blue deck a little. It's hard to picture it being better than an Essence Capture, a Wizard's Retort, a Spell Pierce, or a Negate, but maybe I am wrong. While I am not very high on Narset, Parter of Veils, I do like Narset's Reversal. If for nothing else, this is another interesting curveball in blue. For blue and blue instant rare, copy target instant or sorcery spell, then return it to its owner's hand. You may choose new targets for the copy. Remember what I said about countering Banefire? What if you could copy that Banefire and bounce the opponent's Banefire back to their hand and kill them with their own Banefire? Narset's Reversal is a pretty exciting card for that. There's also a bunch of other interesting applications, such as you're in a counterspell war. I play a thing. The opponent counters it. Well, I can play Narset's Reversal to return that card that I cast, like say a Mirari's Conjecture, to my hand. And, or wait, that doesn't work. So what would be a good one? It would have to be a spell. So let's say it's a, what is it? Not a Patient Rebuilding. Precognitive Perception. Let's say we cast a Precognitive Perception and our opponent goes to counter it. Rather than copying the counter spell, we can copy the Precognitive Perception and return it to our hand, making the counter spell fizzle, resolving a draw 3 and still having a draw 3 for later. Now, this is all really narrow. This is made for a very specific deck and for very specific circumstances. As such, this is probably a sideboard card or something that you play very fringe, a one of. So I won't be running out to craft this. It's another one of these unique options, and we have so many in this set. We had so many in the last set. It seems to be a new direction that R&D is taking, where instead of giving us another crap card, they give us something that's really good in a specific situation, and that situation doesn't come up too often. So picking when to put it in your deck and when to play it really matters. I think that Narset's Reversal is not going to be better than the average counterspell 90% of the time, but that other 10%, if you can find the right time to unleash it, this could be just a huge swing in the game. Silent Submarine. Let me try that again. Silent Submersible is blue and blue for an artifact vehicle at rare. It is a 2/3 vehicle. When it deals combat damage to a player or a planeswalker, draw a card and crew 2. So you can look on this card all you want. It does not have any kind of evasion. It doesn't have a can't be blocked by non-flyers or something weird like that, or can't be blocked by flyers. It doesn't have any type of evasion at all. It doesn't have Island Walk. It seems like it should. But then it would probably be too powerful. So this is an example of a card. It sort of has a built-in Curious Obsession. It's good, but it won't be good as long as the battlefield can be clogged up by creatures with 3 toughness or more. So it's a very specific kind of meta card. A place where I could see it is in combination with Thief of Sanity to drive a control deck nuts. You could play this on turn 2, play Thief of Sanity on turn 3, attack with your Silent Submersible. Do they kill the Submersible? Do they kill the Thief of Sanity? They have to kill something. Either way, you're getting ahead, drawing cards, getting in damage if there is no battlefield. This is another card that is only extremely situationally good, and because of that, I don't think it's very good at all. Crew 2 is also a big problem because the main home I want to put it in is Mono Blue. However, most of Mono Blue's creatures can't crew it, and the ones that can, you don't really want to run out at sorcery speed to crew the Submersible like Merfolk Trickster. So, this is a card I'm a big not fan of, do not plan to craft, and think is probably better looking than it actually is. Its place in Standard is likely potentially in a certain kind of deck, a sideboard card against control. And I wouldn't rate it much higher than that. Now, the format could break in a way that it's much better than that if everything is 2/2 or smaller, because then it can't really be blocked in combat without the opponent giving something up. So we'll keep an eye on that, but I am not on the Silent Submersible submarine ride at Disney World just yet. Spark Double is 3 and a blue for an illusion creature. Rare. You may have Spark Double enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature or planeswalker you control, except it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature. It enters with an additional loyalty counter on it if it's a planeswalker, and it isn't legendary if that permanent is legendary. Holy cow. So we've got a new clone. We can only clone our own things. We can't clone our opponent's things. So we have to be able to untap with something worth cloning on the battlefield. That immediately makes the card a little bit win more, but not completely. And the amount of extra ability this adds to the battlefield is a little bit obscene. It's a little bit absurd. An additional +1/+1 counter might be a really big deal for a creature, but an additional loyalty counter on a planeswalker could be a very big deal. And how about that legendary clause? How often do you get to counter something that's legendary? How great is a second Lyra Dawnbringer or a second Shalai? How amazing is a second, you name the planeswalker? It's actually kind of crazy to be able to have planeswalkers that are copies of each other. What's better than 1 Nicol Bolas? 2 Nicol Bolas. I think that Spark Double is a little bit surprisingly terrifying, because if the opponent gets to keep if you get to keep even one good card on the battlefield, the Spark Double of that card threatens to spiral the game completely out of control. I don't think I'd craft more than 1 for starters, because I don't know if you can play more than 1. It is super situational, and on its own, it's a 0/0 for 4 mana. That is not very good. And I think that it's just one of those things where you want to take a good situation and make it great. It can't make that situation on its own. But we should probably be trying Spark Double in some spots. It looks like it could be a very interesting card. Bleeding Edge is 1 in black sorcery. It is an uncommon. Up to 1 target creature gets -2/2 until end of turn, amass 2. This is an interesting card. It's almost a baby Chupacabra. You can, in many situations, kill a creature and make a 2/2. The problem with it is it's an entire mana more than a Moment of Craving, which is also an instant speed and has the bonus of gain 2 life. There's also Cast Down in a very similar vein. If you need to remove something, is this the card you need? This card strikes me as another sideboard card. Now, on the other hand, if you are already amassing, and we'll get to some other cards that amassed, but let's just say you made a 1/1 amass token at the beginning of your turn, and then you have Bleeding Edge, and you cast it. You now have a 3/3 Amass token, and you took out an opponent's creature. That's a pretty great swing for turn 3. So Bleeding Edge teaming up with other Amass type effects, I think could be very strong. Bleeding Edge on its own is probably a sideboard card at the very best. I do think there will be an Amass deck. I think that a Grixis-style Amass deck might be very competitive, and I'm eager to try it. Bleeding Edge could probably be a 1 or 2 of in that deck. I think because the card is so narrow and only hits certain kind of creatures, that Bleeding Edge could just be pushed out of the format and probably should not be a 4 of. But I think that this card could have a home. Bolus's Citadel is 3 black, black, black. For a legendary artifact, and it is rare, you may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may play the top card of your library. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its converted mana cost rather than pay its mana cost. If you sacrifice 10 non-land permanents, each opponent loses 10 life. So it can be a win condition on its own. It can play a ridiculous amount of spells. It's got a bit of experimental frenzy to it, and you do have to pay life to keep the chain going. So, is this card good, and what is it good for? I am actually very skeptical of this card making huge waves. If there is a deck built around it to just kind of go off, pay a whole bunch of life, and make a whole bunch of things happen, I'm not quite sure what that deck looks like. To me, it just doesn't appear to be the kind of card that you can go off with. And at 6 mana, an effect like that needs to have huge impact on the game. I think about a card like Lich's Mastery. Lich's Mastery sort of had its own level of protection in that all the cards you had already played, the cards you had in your hand, and the cards in your graveyard could be exiled. It was like gaining, if you were at 1 life and you cast Lich's Mastery, it's like you went up to about 10 life. And then from there, if you could gain more life, fill your hand and do crazy things, you win the game. This card, just to play the cards that it reveals, and you probably need to untap with it, to be honest. You probably need to go a full turn cycle and untap with it. Just to play the cards it reveals makes you pay even more life. So this seems like a pretty bad card to me. Will there be a combo deck built around it or something amazing? Maybe there is a world where we play Bolus's Citadel and just immediately tap it for sacrificing 10 permanents to make the opponent lose 10 life. And all of those permanents were creatures, and we had a Judith on the battlefield, so it did a whole bunch of damage to the opponent as well, and just 20 damaged them. Boom, out of nowhere. So maybe that's where this card belongs. It's probably the best case scenario, is that it simply can sacrifice 10 permanents immediately and start ending the game in sort of reverse ascend order. It is a glorious and extra janky way to win the game, and I'll probably brew around that idea for the jank tank. But for you competitive types, I don't think I would craft or come anywhere near Bolus's Citadel. Bond of Revival is 4 in a black for a sorcery uncommon. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste until your next turn. Wow, this card is pretty wild. It is not often we get a Rise from the Grave with haste. That is some power creep, and it is exciting. As now, if we get back a particular card, being able to attack with it or use its ability right away is much better than seeing it die again. This gives new life to Reanimator decks and possibly makes them good. At 5 mana, that's still expensive, but at uncommon, it's not like it's hard to get them. So I'll be using my uncommon wild cards on some Bonds of Revival and re-exploring the Reanimator archetype as soon as possible. There are a few cards, such as a certain Boar God we'll get to later, that I particularly would love to use Bond of Revival on. But even if you're hitting something like a Palaka Worm, gain 7 life and hit him with that 7 damage, sounds pretty good to me. So long live Reanimator, perhaps it is back again. Command the Dreadhorde is a 4 black sorcery rare. Choose any number of target creature and or planeswalker cards in graveyards. Command the Dreadhorde deals damage to you equal to the total converted mana cost of those cards. Put them onto the battlefield under your control. Well, normally I am not willing to take that much damage. It would probably just kill me to fetch those things playing any kind of a control or mid-range deck. However, there's a little bit of an exception. It is interesting that this can get back your Wild Growth Walkers and a bunch of Explorer creatures so that you gain the life back immediately, and it could also bring back cards like Vivian Reed and things like that. So maybe this is a one of in a Golgari or Sultai list. But what I'm thinking of is a card we already reviewed, the Wanderer. If you remember the Wanderer from earlier in this video, it prevents all non-combat damage that would be dealt to you. Well, this is not combat damage, so if you have the Wanderer out, you can command the Dreadhorde, get all the Planeswalkers and all the creatures in all the graveyards. They are yours, just take them all. That sounds pretty sweet to me. So why pay 5 mana for a Bond of Revival when you can pay 6 mana and have them all? Be Liliana, command the Dreadhorde. Davriel Rogue Shadowmage is 2 and a black for a legendary planeswalker. Uncommon. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has 1 or fewer cards in their hand, Davriel Rogue Shadowmage deals 2 damage to them. -1, target player discards a card. 3 loyalty. Well, it's a win con for a rack-style discard deck, and considering how often every season I'm asked to build a discard deck, and I try to consistently remind people that they are bad, I will probably try this because guess what? The discard deck will still be bad, but at least I'll have a pretty neat effect to try to damage and kill my opponent with. Killing them with the Rogue Shadowmage might be one of those bucket list type MTG jank tank events here on the channel, and something I'll at least give a try. I think many of you will enjoy it. This is not a competitive card. It is possible against some kind of a control mirror thing that you board this in because it's simply 3 mana. Target player discards 3 cards over 3 turns if they don't have any creatures on the battlefield, but that's about the height of where I could see this being played. And I don't have a lot of hope for the card. If only it had a plus that did anything. Even if it was just +1, no effect, I'd consider this a little bit better. But at just -1, -1, -1 die, I can't get very excited. Still, there's going to be some discard jank shenanigans. Some of you will like it. I'll shake my head the whole time. Dreadhorde Invasion is a card I've alluded to for a while. At 1 and a black enchantment rare, at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and amass 1. Whenever a zombie token you control with power 6 or greater attacks, it gains lifelink until end of turn. So every turn, your zombie creature grows by 1 and you lose a life. If you ever attack with it at a 6 power or higher, you get a lot of that life back with a lifelink type effect. If your zombie token dies, it makes another one at the beginning of the next upkeep. I think this card is very good. I don't think it is ridiculously good. I think it is uniquely strong to make sure that if you are playing other amass cards, you often have something to amass onto. And whenever you amass onto an existing token, it's like you gain haste, plus your body is more relevant. The body gets bigger and bigger. It hits the gym. It is good stuff. I think that Dreadhorde Invasion will go into the Grixis or other style of like Esper possibly amass decks, and I think it will be very strong there. Consider if you even have a creature with amass 2 on the battlefield and you cast a card like Enter the God Eternals, which is one we talked about in the last set review that deals 4 damage to any target, you gain 4 life, you mill for 4, and you amass for 4. Now you attack with the 6 power amassed onto creature. You gain 6 life. That means you killed something and you gained 10 life while making a 6/6. And that's not a ridiculous thing to do. All you had to do was have your Dreadhorde Invasion on turn 2, have one of your creatures get amassed up to a 2/2, and have 1 Enter the God Eternals in your hand. That swing is insane, and why I think that there will be a very good amass deck, and why I'll probably craft about 3 Dreadhorde Invasions early to try out in that deck. I might craft my 4th eventually. I think 3 is a good number to start with. So yeah, I look forward to testing the Dreadhorde Invasion. Finale of Eternity is X black sorcery, mythic rare, destroy up to 3 target creatures with toughness X or less. If X is 10 or more, return all creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is another card where the finale extra text is mostly meaningless. Once you can cast this for 12, it's so late in the game, it's kind of crazy. and it still can only destroy up to 3 creatures. Now, the toughness payment gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it means it's going to be very hard to kill, say, a Galta with this. But being able to kill 3 creatures, and then even if you don't get anything back from the battlefield, is a big swing. Where does this card go? I don't think you can run it in best of 1. Just getting to kill that many creatures with it seems really hard. It is a sideboard card, I think, at best. And where do I bring it in? I probably bring in 1, maybe 2 copies in a mid-range mirror. I continue to think of Sultai a lot in these situations because there's a lot of creatures going around with the Explore package and just the Branch Walkers and Jadelight Rangers flying back and forth and being fodder, and Ravenous Chupacabra. I think that getting to blow up, say, 3 creatures in the mirror and possibly return some things from the graveyard to the battlefield could be good. I just think Command the Dread Horde is probably better, along with a number of other cards. I'm not high on Finale of Eternity. I think at the very, very best, it will be a 1-of in a sideboard. And I think that that is the ceiling for the card, unless I'm missing something dramatic here. So, interesting card. Go Liliana. Totally Team Liliana. But this is not a big money rare for me. A card I'm much more excited about is the God Eternal Bantu. For 3 black, this is a legendary zombie god that is mythic. It is a 5/6 menace. When God Eternal Bantu enters the battlefield, sacrifice any number of other permanents and draw that many cards, and then it has the God Clause. So, where do we use the God Eternal Bantu? I've got a few ideas. I think a few things that stand out that are very basic is, again, the Sultai Explore Shell. Sacrifice those Explore creatures that are outclassed on the battlefield and some extra lands and restock your hand. That's easy mode, I would say, for the God Eternal Bantu. A little bit better, how about Aristocrats? Have a Judith on the battlefield with some Footlight Fiends and some Hunted Witnesses. Sacrifice a whole bunch of them, draw a whole bunch of cards, get those death triggers. Maybe a Cruel Celebrant helps you gain a bunch of life and deal a bunch of damage to the opponent. Maybe you burn them out this way. Now that's pretty cool. That's pretty exciting. Okay, CGB, what else have you got? Well, this says sacrifice any number of other permanents. What if we did something along the lines of play a Smothering Tithe and cast emergency powers, making a whole bunch of treasures? What if we use the emergency powers to put another Smothering Tithe onto the battlefield, sacrifice the 7 treasures we just made, and cast emergency powers again to make 14 treasures? What if we then played Bantu, the God Eternal, and we sacrificed all of those treasures, and we drew a card for all of them, generating, you guessed it, a whole bunch more treasures? Well, actually, the opponent would have to draw cards, but after we draw all those cards, maybe we can make the opponent draw cards using something shenanigans. Anyway, what if we just played the God Eternal Bantu when we have those 14 treasures from those emergency powers, and we sacrificed all of our permanents to draw our entire deck, floating 4 mana, to play Jace, the one that lets you win when you draw from an empty deck, and we draw our whole deck with God Eternal Bantu. What about that? Think you can see I've got plans for this card. So I'm excited to craft like 2 to 3 of them and play them play Bantu in a number of spots and see how it all adds up, see what she can do. So I'm totally excited about this card. Liliana the Dread Horde General is 4 and black for legendary Planeswalker Liliana, mythic rare with 6 loyalty. Whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. +1. Create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. -4. Each player sacrifices 2 creatures. -9. Each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifice the rest. The -9 cataclysms the opponent. Boom. The +1 makes a 2/2, and if it dies, you draw a card. The -4 removes 4 creatures from the battlefield, and you draw 2 cards, of course, if you controlled 2 creatures. This card is amazing. At 6 mana, it needs to be to see play, but I think Liliana passes the test and gives Vraska the Relic Seeker a run for their money. So, where will she fit? I think that she fits in Golgari. I think she fits in Sultai. Like many other cards we've already covered, I think that best mid-range deck in the format just has even more tools than it ever had before. And that's kind of scary. But I wouldn't be afraid to play Liliana in a deck with Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Esper could run this card as making the 2/2s. If the opponent goes through killing them, you just draw more cards with it. Also, the minusing to kill 2 things can be huge, like a one-sided Wrath if you're in a creatureless deck. But there are even other different archetypes with Liliana that excite me. We talked about Bantu. Let's talk about other cards, like if we ran this in a black-white deck. What if we're sacrificing cards like Tithe Taker and Hunted Witness? We're drawing cards and we're replacing them with creatures, and if those creatures die, we draw more cards. So this card is amazing and is a lot of gas and must be dealt with immediately. It checks all the boxes for an amazing Planeswalker, and I will have at least 3 of them the very first week that War of the Spark is out to play in a number of different shells, and it does make my top 5 cards in the set. Liliana's Triumph is 1 in a black instant uncommon. Each opponent sacrifices a creature. If you control a Liliana Planeswalker, each opponent also discards a card. This is an example of a good removal spell that is amazing on its own and is even stronger with a few Lilianas in your deck, because if you get that bonus, you're really doing it. That said, there's already a lot of sacrifice effects going on in the deck. The Angrath sacrifice effect that can make you sacrifice a Planeswalker or artifact is an upgrade from this card, which can only hit creatures. So in best of 1, this is not a card I think you run. And it's probably a very good sideboard card. I guess Carnage Tyrant's time has come and gone with all these sacrifice effects in the format. And Liliana's Triumph is a very good sacrifice effect. I just don't know if it replaces Doomblade. It probably doesn't replace Doomblade, aka Cast Down completely, but it can supplement it. It can be there as well to hit the Lyras of the world and other legendary things that come along, if you have other ways to keep the board clear. How many Liliana's Triumphs will we run? I'm quite honestly, because of the quality of removal around in the format, I think I'm going to start with just 1 and see how it lines up in, say, my Esper control shells, maybe some of my black-white type decks, my Abzan decks, things of that nature, and we'll go from there. I just don't know if this is quite the droid I'm looking for. Massacre Girl is a 3 black legendary creature human assassin at rare. A 4/4 menace. When Massacre Girl enters the battlefield, each other creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Whenever a creature dies this turn, each creature other than Massacre Girl gets -1/-1 until end of turn. So Massacre Girl needs some help to start the party. Something has to have 1 toughness or have taken 1 damage that turn. And then once things start dying, it's really easy for this to cascade and kill just about everything except for Massacre Girl, leaving you with a 4/4 menace and the opponent with nothing. And probably you with nothing too. This is yet another card that I really want to pair specifically with Liliana Dreadhorde General in an Explorer type deck, in a mid-range type deck, a Sultai type deck, where you can play Massacre Girl, kill a whole bunch of little creatures and tokens, including some of your own, such as Llanowar Elves, to help make sure the party gets started properly. If you have a Liliana down, you draw a bunch of cards. But regardless, you get to wipe out those white aggro decks that are so annoying. You get to wipe out those low red creatures decks that are so annoying. Massacre Girl is a sweeper on a body, which is a pretty excellent effect. I don't know how many you can run. This is one of those things where I'll probably craft 2 because I want to play it a bunch of times and get a feel for it, but it might end up being a card that only goes in a sideboard and should only be like a 1 of for surprise. I could also see it being a 3 of. The kind of card that you always want on turn 5 to reset your battlefield and be ready to take over. Or the kind of card where you actually want to kill all your other effects to work with Cruel Celebrant or Liliana Dreadhorde General to draw cards, or fill your graveyard for some reason with death effects. So I like Massacre Girl. This card is amazing. It's probably not top 5 most powerful, but it's top 5 in my heart for cards that are just really exciting to see. And I don't know what the animation is going to look like, but I am really looking forward to see what they do for animation for this card. Price of Betrayal is 1 black, sorcery, uncommon, remove up to 5 counters from target artifact, creature, planeswalker, or opponent. Well, I'm covering this because for many of you out there, For 1 black sorcery, this might read, destroy target to fairy. Yeah, if you remove all the loyalty counters, the Planeswalker goes to the graveyard. It's that simple. And if we're talking about Planeswalkers with 5 loyalty or less, or if we just have a way to deal extra damage to that Planeswalker, such as attacking it, for 1 mana, we are killing a Planeswalker. Yeah, that could happen many times. But that's not the end of the versatility, and the reason I like it better than some other cards we'll come across, like the Elder Spell, who's coming up. That can only target Planeswalkers. This can target artifacts, creatures, or opponents. And removing counters from them could matter. A few spots that I'm thinking of is if you set the opponent's treasure map all the way back to 0, it doesn't flip. Maybe it's not the greatest example since they can work its way up again, but maybe it is. How about Amass? Anything that's amassed is a 0/0 zombie token with +1/+1 counters put on it. This removes those counters from the amassed creature, so it can immediately kill the amassed creature if it has 5 or less counters. So that's pretty impressive. There's a number of other reasons that something might have +1/+1 counters. A Growth Chamber Guardian could be made into a 2/2 after it already blocked a 2/2 creature, leaving it dead. So there is some versatility to the Price of Betrayal. What if you took away a Skargan Hellkite's +1/+1 counter so it can't use the ability anymore? Not the greatest idea. I'd rather just kill the bird, of course, but sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. And I like that this is almost 1 mana kill target Planeswalker with other unique flexibility built in. And of course, go Liliana. Don't let the Bolus's Elder Spell thingy destroying you get you down. You can do this. Fight, girl. Don't let him get ya. The Elder Spell is a black rare sorcery that destroys any number of Planeswalkers. Choose a Planeswalker you control, put 2 loyalty counters on it for each Planeswalker destroyed in this way. In Best of 1, this card isn't versatile enough, and there will probably be decks without Planeswalkers, despite all the efforts of War of the Spark, so I don't think you can run this there. But in Best of 3, this might be that spicy 1 of or 2 of out of the sideboard that does ridiculous things. Go ahead, opponent. Get ahead of me on the battlefield. Play your Planeswalker. Now I will play my Planeswalker, and on the same turn cast the Elder Spell and ramp up its loyalty and kill your 1 or 2 Planeswalkers. It's obviously very dangerous letting the opponent have Planeswalkers for multiple turns, and with so many in the format, it's interesting. Say the opponent has the Wanderer down on their side of the battlefield, and they play a Vivian Reed as well. So they're starting to really pull ahead, and they just played out their cards, and they're feeling great about themselves. But you play a Karn, and you cast the Elder Spell, ramping it up to 8 freaking loyalty and killing both of their Planeswalkers. That's a tremendous swing in the game. I still think it only really comes out of the sideboard though, unless there is some kind of a Planeswalker Super Friend deck that completely conquers the format, takes over everything, is the best deck. Well, all we have to do is play some black with the Elder Spell and start tearing that deck to pieces. So this is an important printing. It is a check on the format. This format will not be completely overcome by a million Planeswalkers, because if it is, we can always turn to a card like this to fix the problem. Into red, we have Chandra, the Fire Artisan, 2 red legendary Planeswalker Chandra at rare. Whenever 1 or more loyalty counters are removed from Chandra Fire Artisan, she deals that much damage to target opponent or Planeswalker. +1, exile the top card of your library. You may play it this turn. -7, exile the top 7 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. So, a few interesting things. Number 1, when you -7 your Chandra, you also deal 7 damage to an opponent or Planeswalker. Also, whenever the opponent attacks or deals direct damage to your Chandra, then it will deal that much damage to an opponent or Planeswalker. If the opponent casts the card we just covered, the Price of Betrayal, to remove 5 counters from Chandra, it will deal that much damage to an opponent or Planeswalker. So, trying to get some things right about the loyalty static ability. I misread it on a previous video, and a lot of people wanted to correct me on it. I hear ya. So, is this card good? Is it actually good? It's okay. Wouldn't you rather have Experimental Frenzy? Possibly not. There are some big red decks that play Karn instead of Experimental Frenzy because they're more about gradual advantage. I think that Karn is better than this card, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, because Karn can minus to make threats. Those constructs can be huge in combination with a treasure map. This card Not so powerful, not so great, to be honest. I do like that when you exile the top card of your library, if it's a land, you may still play it, which is different from the other Chandra. But without a minus that can kill things or an ability to make an additional mana like the other Chandra, she's kind of a shell of her former self, which doesn't make sense to me. I feel like Jaya Ballad should have taught her some really cool stuff, and that she should have her game face on, but this isn't my favorite Chandra. And I honestly think that you'll be better off with Karn or Experimental Frenzy, depending on the type of deck you're playing. However, Karn is legendary. Maybe the right split is to run a Chandra and 2 Karns, or 2 Chandras and 2 Karns in that spot, and go from there. But Chandra does not protect herself. So, at its best, I think we've got a bit of a sideboard card. And at its worst, we just might not play Chandra. I'll probably craft 1 and see how it goes. I'm excited to talk about Dreadhorde Arcanist. For 1 and a red, this is a zombie wizard rare with trample. Whenever Dreadhorde Arcanist attacks, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with converted mana cost less than or equal to Dreadhorde Arcanist power from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that card would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. Alright, a lot going on here. Basically, you want cards in your graveyard that you can cast and recast. This card, in combination with, say, a shock, can cast a shock and recast a shock. That is a little bit of value attached to a body. That's a pretty good thing. But what if we could do it better? Anything that pumps this thing's power suddenly takes on a new life. And we already talked about Feather the Redeemed, and we already talked about the 10th Legion Why do I struggle with this card? 10th District Legionnaire. We already talked about that card. So what about this card, Dreadhorde Arcanist, with cards like Defiant Strike? Well, you could cast Defiant Strike, make this a 2/3, draw a card, attack with it, cast Defiant Strike again from the graveyard, draw another card, make this a 3/3, trample for 2 mana, and you drew 2 cards. That's really good. And you only spent 1 mana to do it. Holy cow. So yeah, it's that line without paying the mana cost that really makes it even better. But what if we can add even more buffs? What if we think bigger? What if we cast Collision Colossus? In this case, I think it's the Colossus side. And we make this a 5/7 trample attacker. Well, we can immediately flash back the Collision Colossus and make this a 9/11 trample attacker on turn 3, you guys. So there's a lot to be done with Dreadhorde Arcanist. Some of it might be absolutely insane. Now, even on that Collision Colossus turn, we still have 1 more mana left. We could use it to cast a Thud. That's 18 damage in 1 turn. If we cast a turn 1 shock, that's a turn 3 kill. So there might be a deck, a significant archetype that this is a key part of. I do think I'll craft 4 of these right away and try to figure out what that is. I think that this could spawn a new archetype. Unlike many cards that we've come across that kind of fit into other archetypes, this card and Pump Effects, along with the Amass Shell being the other one, are the 2 things that I think could be entirely new archetypes born out of this format that are incredibly powerful. So get your Dreadhorde Arcanists. It could turn out to be no big deal. It could just be another thing that eats a lightning strike. Or it could be the card you play on turn 2 that defines the format that every deck must be able to deal with. And I look forward to trying to break this card. Finale of Promise is an X-Red-Red Sorcery Mythic Rare. You may cast up to 1 target instant card and or up to 1 target sorcery card from your graveyard, each with converted mana cost X or less without paying their mana costs. If a card cast this way would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. If X is 10 or more, copy each of those spells twice. If you may choose new targets for the copies. So if we're just saying kind of basic, let's say we play this on turn 4 for 2 and we have a Lava Coil and a Lightning Strike in our graveyard. We cast both of those for 4 mana. We hit the opponent's dome, we exile their creature, we smash with our red cards. Yeah, it's fine. It's okay. Now, let's say that we play this card for that absurd 10 amount and we pick, say, a Lightning Strike and a Skewer the Critics. That's 18 damage, and that's what we should be getting if we get 12 mana together, to be honest. I'm not that high on this card. There's plenty of spells, maybe like Thousand Year Storm type shenanigans and big mana control type shenanigans, where maybe playing this can be a very big effect, but I don't think I want more than one. 2 is probably the ceiling on this card, and even then, you have to have a stock graveyard to make it work. I feel like Mirari's Conjecture is kind of doing this, but better, because you actually get the card back and you get to figure it out. Although this plays them right away. I don't know. I'm not huge on Finale of Promise. Maybe if I play it a few times, I'll feel better. At this point, though, I'm not very excited about the card. I probably won't craft it and wait to see if somebody else can beat me to death with it. Quick hitter here, Grim Initiate for 1 red is a zombie warrior, first strike, it's common. When it dies, amass 1. So a 1/1 that creates another 1/1 and has first strike can be very good to hold off those red creature decks and other small creature decks like in white. Grim Initiate might be okay. Just another aristocrat style card and possibly a little bit of a mass synergy. Nothing to get too excited about, but just something to keep your eye on. Heartfire is 1 in red for an instant at common. As an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature or planeswalker. It deals 4 damage to any target. I'm interested to see if the format breaks in such a way that makes Heartfire good. Is it reasonable to leave 2 mana up, wait until either the opponent's at 4 life, or the opponent goes to target one of your creatures or planeswalkers with removal, and you respond with a Heartfire, so as to not lose card advantage? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not that excited about this card. We already have so much burn and so many good burn spells. Games are rarely coming down to 1 point of damage. It's usually just dead, dead, dead. So I feel like 1 or 2 Heartfires might be something you could add to those red decks, but most of the time, since it's a little bit more awkward and requires a creature on the battlefield to sacrifice, I don't think that Heartfire will make the cut over making all the Skewer Critics and Wizard's Lightnings work. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. It's the 1-card hype train. Ilharg, the Razor Boar, is 3 red for a legendary creature boar god, mythic rare. It has trample, and whenever Ilharg, the Razor Boar, attacks, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Return that creature to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. When it dies, God Claws. 6/6. This thing is huge, and it's a very, very exciting card. So the main things that I see with this card is it dies quickly, sadly, to just about any removal. This thing needs haste, so you need this in a Rhythm of the Wilds style deck, and you need another creature in your hand. So it would help if you had some selection, a Domri or a Vraska, something to put more creatures into your hand. This thing with Domri is actually a pretty sweet combo, because on one hand, you can plus it for the Riot to make this thing have haste and put something else on the battlefield right away. Also, if you minus the Domri, you can get more creatures in your hand to take advantage of the boar. So this is Domri's pet, is kind of how I see it. Another great way to play this card is a Reanimator style shell, where you bring back the Razor Boar with the new card that is Rise from the Grave but gives haste. Then you attack with the Razor Boar, and if you have another creature in your hand, you immediately get the effect. Think of a Palaka Worm coming down, gaining 7 life, getting in there for 13 trample damage, and then you bounce the Palaka Worm again so that you can gain that life again in the near future. Card is pretty nuts. I look forward to making some really excellent Razor Boar style decks very early on in the format. It still is one big expensive creature. A Mortify blows up all your good times, so I'm not going to get too carried away, but this is probably something I'll craft 3 to 4 copies of, just because we're going to have to make a Razor Boar deck. It's going to have to be in the Jank Tank, and maybe there's something a little bigger than the Jank Tank. This card is on the cusp of more excellent than that, and I look forward to seeing if it can make it. Krenko, the Tin Street Kingpin, is 2 in a red for a 1/2, Legendary Goblin. It's a rare. Whenever Krenko attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So keep that in mind. It goes to 2/3 as soon as you turn it sideways. Then create any number of 1/1 Goblin creature tokens equal to Krenko's power. So this is the kind of card I usually do not like. It dies to Shock, it dies to Moment of Craving, it dies to Cry of the Canarium, it dies to all these things. It has to attack to be good. The reason I have a little bit more hope for Krenko is because of the Dreadhorde Arcanist and Feather and other cards like that that are better with pump spells. This seems like another card that could go into that deck, and those other creatures must be dealt with, and quickly, which might leave Krenko to pick up the Defiant Strike and then pay it off big time by making a number of 1/1 Goblin creature tokens. So between Feather, between the 10th District Legionnaire, and then the Dreadhorde Arcanist, and now Krenko, we have 16 creatures that can really benefit from those +1/+1 effects. All that, as long as the opponent's removal blinks for even a second and we get to turn one of those things sideways and go off, the value can be overpowering, which is why I have hope for Krenko, the Tin Street Kingpin. It's also important to keep in mind, a card that's been forgotten a bit, is that we do have the Goblin War Chief in the format, which gives the other goblins haste. Speaking of giving haste, we have Domri, we have Rhythm of the Wilds. So there is more to it, and it is quite possible that Krenko might be able to pay off big time in the right shell, with the right supporting cast. Mizzium Tank is 1 red artifact vehicle rare trample. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Mizzium Tank becomes an artifact and gets +1/+1 until end of turn, crew 1. I like that anything can crew it, but I do not like that the non-creature spell really exists here. It's interesting, but how much do we really want, say, a 4/3 trample versus other great cards that we could have in the format? See, a non-creature spell could be a planeswalker, but most of the time we're talking about, say, burn spells from the red deck or cantrips and draw twos from the Drake deck. And in all of those cases, I just don't know that having an artifact that sits on the battlefield otherwise is very good. It's going to be very hard to block with this card, although you can. I'm not excited about this card yet. Somebody will have to show me where and how this card can be super powerful, because I think right now in your red deck, you just want different 3-drops. There you have wonderful cards like Goblin Chainwhirler and Legion Warboss. I think that in your Drake deck, why wouldn't you want other Drakes? I think the tank doesn't quite fit in and doesn't do anything the turn it enters the battlefield. It won't block when you pay 3 mana for this on turn 3. So, with that in mind, I'm very low on the Mizzium Tank. I don't plan to craft it, I don't plan to worry about it until somebody shows me that it's a much better card than I think it is. Neheb Dreadhorde Champion is 2 red for a legendary creature zombie minotaur warrior. It is rare. Trample. Whenever Neheb Dreadhorde Champion deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, you may discard any number of cards. If you do, draw that many cards and add that much red. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. It's an interesting card. It's another giant bundle of stats, much like the green and black Lich in this set, that I think in the end is going to be a miss, because at 4 mana for a ball of stats, you still need immediate value, or Ravenous Chupacabra, or some other removal spell. Just makes you feel bad, and the opponent gets ahead while you just threw something in the graveyard. Therefore, I don't think this is the card. However, I really do want to play with this, especially in a Reanimator type shell where discarding a bunch of like expensive cards like Zakama into the graveyard and then getting them back later could be sweet. Give this thing haste and you can do some crazy shenanigans. And that's what the new Reanimation spell does. So for me, this is another tool for the Reanimator's toolbox. And the bonus mana could come in really handy with an outlet like a Zakama that you reanimate. So I look forward to seeing just how insane this card can get once we throw some haste on it. And I feel like I'm saying that about a lot of the red creatures. So thank goodness there's the new Haste Reanimator card. Thank goodness we have Rhythm of the Wilds and Domri. Those are cards that if you haven't crafted yet, you may want to for this next set. I'm going to quickly inform you that Samut's Sprint exists. It is a 1-red instant common. Target creature gets +2/+1, gains haste until end of turn, and scry 1. On its own, I would not play a card like this, but since I've already mentioned several times that a lot of creatures in this set would benefit from haste, and we've talked about the Feather the Redeemed and the all the names of the cards are going to evade me, but you know what I mean, the Feather heroic style deck. This is another card that fits into that very well. The Scry provides value. Giving the creatures haste provides huge hits right away. It can be flashed back by the Arcanist. It can be returned by the Feather to Scry many times. So I think that this card is going to fit right in to that deck. Sarkhan the Masterless is 3 red legendary Sarkhan Planeswalker rare. Whenever a creature attacks you or a Planeswalker you control, each dragon you control deals 1 damage to that creature. And it has 5 loyalty. He has 5 loyalty. +1 until end of turn, each Planeswalker you control becomes a 4/4 red dragon creature and gains flying. -3, create a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. So that line of text at the top on the static ability might not mean much unless you have multiple dragons, at which point the opponent attacking you doesn't seem to be quite the thing. But it's interesting that if you have 2 or 3 dragons on the battlefield and your opponent has a bunch of 2/2s, they can't really attack you because all their creatures would just die. I really look forward to the first salty oops scoop from somebody who forgets about that ability and throws like 10 creatures at me and they all die. The +1 is really interesting. Each Planeswalker you control. So if you control multiple Planeswalkers, suddenly you have not only Sarkhan becoming a 4/4 dragon, but your other Planeswalkers becoming dragons too. And if you have 2 or 3 Planeswalkers on the battlefield and you play Sarkhan and you plus it, you might just be able to one-shot the opponent and attack with several of them. That's pretty sweet. There's just something really cool about all the Planeswalkers transforming into dragons. At worst case scenario, a -3 to make another dragon is pretty sweet, and it's kind of a double dragon. It doesn't block like a double dragon. But if you pay 5 mana, and your play pattern is -3, make a dragon, and the opponent doesn't deal with your Sarkhan, they untap, and either they can't attack and kill it or remove it. Next turn, you hit +1, and you have a 4/4 red dragon Sarkhan, and the dragon you made. So in a way, it's like getting 8 power for 5 mana. So this card might be better than it looks. It's very interesting, and it's going to be fun to play around with. My plan is to craft 2 and mess with it in big red decks, mess with it in like a Jund Super Friends style strategy, and mess with it in a full-on Dragons Grixis list with several other dragon-related cards. So I'm going to enjoy Sarkhan the Masterless. I'm not sure it will be a tier 1 level power card. I don't know if this will be in Mythic rank, but I will have a very good time playing with it, and I think you're going to enjoy the videos when those come out. People love dragons. Awakening of Vitu-Ghazi is 3 green instant rare. Put 9 +1/+1 counters on target land you control. It becomes a legendary 0/0 elemental creature with haste named Vitu-Ghazi. It's still a land. So you should think of this as a 9/9 for 6, because you need to put it on an untapped land or you can't attack that turn or block that turn. So think of it as 6 mana, 9/9 haste. That's pretty solid stats in much of the world. Also, being a land means it's immune to a lot of effects that say target non-land thing an opponent controls. There isn't as much of that right now. There was a lot more of that in Zendikar block. Planar Outburst, for example, destroyed all non-land creatures. But is Vitu-Ghazi good enough? At 6 mana for an out-of-nowhere 9/9, this is a follow-up to a sweeper that could be like really painful. But keep in mind it's also an instant, which is something unique. On turn 5, you could, in theory, keep your mana open past the turn. If the opponent wraths the board, taps out to play their own creature, or whatever, you could Awakening of Vitu-Ghazi on end step, untap, and have a 9/9 ready to go on offense. If you play another land, well, you can play... Let's see. I'm kind of curious how that works, but I think this works. If you have 2 Awakenings of the Vitu-Ghazi, you play 1 on end step for 5, and you make your Vitu-Ghazi land. You untap, you play your 6th land, you cast Awakening of the Vitu-Ghazi, you target the same land. I'm confident that means you have an 18/18 Vitu-Ghazi creature to attack with, and that the legendariness and the become 0/0-ness don't override the +1/+1 counters. That's a pretty sick play pattern. As always, it can be killed. Dies to Doomblade, right? Doesn't die to cast down. That's worth noting. Doesn't die to things that can't target lands for whatever reason. So what about this with... Is there like a thing that say lands can't be targeted? It's that 2 white card, right? Maybe there's a combination with that new legendary creature that says lands can't be targeted. We're going to throw that on screen right now because now I'm curious. I've got to look that one up for myself. What do we got here? What do we got? What's going on? Let's read the card. Let's read this card. Lands on the battlefield and land cards in graveyards can't be the targets of spells or abilities your opponent control. Yeah, this gives your 9/9 Dehex proof. That's pretty hype, right? That's exciting. I think we've got a new deck idea for the Jank Tank, and who knows? Maybe it will be more. This is the kind of thing I really need to play with. An instant speed 9/9. It's kind of scary. Bond of Flourishing is 1 and a green for a sorcery uncommon. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a permanent card among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library. You gain 3 life. I want this card to be good. Adventurous Impulse is probably significantly better. The 3 life is what people are going to point to a lot as being good against red, but if you're not making progress on the battlefield, you end up giving that right back to an attack from the red deck. So it's not like you actually did much. You just added an extra card to your hand. And usually against red, you need to be getting on the battlefield as early as possible or removing from the battlefield, or they just take it back and it doesn't really matter. I actually don't think this card is good. I think people are excited over this card for the wrong reasons. We don't play Anticipate right now, and Anticipate is 3 mana and lets you take any card. The 3 life isn't good enough to me for the restriction, or to add it to a deck that actually has good 2-drops, like green, and much better things to do with their mana. So I'm very negative on Bond of Flourishing, and I think this is going to become the card that most people disagree with me about and play anyway, and I'm just going to have to learn to live with that. Evolution Sage is 2 and a green for a 3/2 elf druid, uncommon. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. And just as a reminder, that means put a +1/+1 counter, or any counter, a loyalty counter, a +1/+1 counter, an infect counter, a -1/-1 counter, whatever counter you need to, on any permanent or player that already has a counter. So you can grow up your Planeswalker. You can make your +1/+1 counter thing have another +1/+1 counter. You can put another -1/-1 counter on something else, etc. You can level up your treasure map if you want to. There's a number of things you can do with the Evolution Sage. Your Phylactery Lich counter can get another Phylactery Lich counter. I don't know. This card is interesting in that landfall is certainly an effect that is in many ways free. So the idea that for 3 mana, you can play an Evolution Sage and then drop a land or sacrifice an Evolving Wilds and do some shenanigans is pretty neat. Will it actually make a certain deck type better? That's what we have to discover. I think that this could be very good in like green-white, where we can just go ahead and hit a land, and then everything that we venerated Loxodon gets another +1/+1 counter on top of that, or Unbreakable Formation gets doubled up. So maybe that's good enough, or maybe it's just win more. This card kind of borders for me between very good and just kind of silly. I'm sure there will be some fun Jank Tank decks. What I'm really wondering is, does a constructed deck consistently put enough +1 or enough counters on things and then take advantage of having extras of those things? Does it need to take advantage of those things? I don't know. And for 3 mana being a 3/2 that can be shocked, that's a pretty big negative as well. So right now, I'm lukewarm on the Evolution Sage. At uncommon, we don't have much to lose. Go ahead, wildcard it up, and try to build some funky brews. I'm curious to see if somebody can make a really competitive deck out of this. I don't see it right now. I don't see that coming. Finale of Devastation. X green sorcery, mythic rare, search your library and or graveyard for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less and put it onto the battlefield. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. If X is 10 or more, creatures you control get +X/+X and gain haste until end of turn. So if you can get 12 mana, you get an ultra mega overrun type effect on this card. So similar to Green Sun Zenith, letting you play kind of this creature toolbox type effect. This is a pretty neat card. It doesn't have to get a green creature, which was a restriction with Green Sun Zenith. Instead, you can go get Thib and draw 2 cards for only 4 mana, if that's your jam. But you can get different colors, which I think is pretty sweet. How about searching your graveyard? That's pretty neat too, because it gives you a more and different unique toolbox effect. If you just have one of a card and it dies, you can still pull it back with the finale. So that's pretty exciting too. This card is neat. Adding 2 to a casting cost of any creature though in your deck is not trivial. You'll need a really good reason to fetch it. Getting another Jadra Light Ranger because you already have a Wild Growth Walker and you want more life is perfectly fine and all. But if you're dead before that happens, you didn't really do much, and that's a 5 mana type effect. So I'm curious to see how this card fits into these toolbox type approaches and where it works out. And I love the big finisher on the top if you get it to 12 mana. This is the big X spell you might want with Nissa, which is a card that's coming up that generates a huge amount of mana. I also want to know about the flavor. Did Nissa summon Galta to go fight Bolus? Is that what's going on here? Does anybody know if this like little kind of tuff on the back of the dino, is that Galta? Or is that a different dinosaur that I should know about? I don't see the headgear for a Carnage Tyrant. But I think this is really sweet, and I'm really excited to craft probably 2 of this card and build a green toolbox deck that can go a little nuts. I wouldn't be surprised to find that 4 of this card was part of some crazy green combo-y deck before the end of the format. Ronus Eternal... God Eternal Ronus. Long set review, folks. 3 green, legendary creature, zombie god, mythic, 5/5 death touch. When it enters the battlefield, double the power of each other creature you control until end of turn. Those creatures gain vigilance till end of turn, god claws. Well, we just did Finale of Devastation. I feel like this would be a really fun one to fetch up if you just want to hit your opponent as hard as you possibly can. Knowing that you have a card in your deck that doubles the power of each creature you control and gives them vigilance makes for some huge combat steps. And just in like the mono green and green splash red or green splash blue Galta decks, this is such a scary card. Plus it's very hard to remove. It comes back again and again. I love this card. I'm going to craft probably 2 to start with, throw them in Galta style decks, but also in other things. And there's other fun stuff you can do. When you double something's power, your thud becomes crazier. When you double something's power, just doubling Galta's power is like casual 24 trample damage. Absolutely wild. So yeah, a lot you can do with the God Eternal Ronus, but when I say a lot, what I really mean is smash face more and more, and a bit more than average. So God Eternal Ronus, I look forward to casting you in the near future. Nissa, who shakes the world. 3 green, rare legendary planeswalker. Whenever you tap a forest for mana, add an additional green for a static ability. 5 loyalty. +1. Put 3 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 target non-creature land you control. Untap it. It is a 0/0 elemental creature with vigilance and haste that's still a land. So I really like this vigilance because you can attack with it and still use it for mana. You get an emblem with lands you control. This is -8, by the way. You get an emblem with lands you control, have indestructible. Search your library for any number of forest cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped. Shuffle your library. I think that the bonus for Nissa is all in the static ability here. For 5 mana, you get a planeswalker that says whenever you tap a forest for mana, you make an additional green. What do you do with that power? Can you do something amazing with it? Banefire is totally on the table. Hydroid Krasis is totally on the table. The finales are totally on the table. You just need... what I'm thinking of, when I'm playing this, is playing it with cards with a lot of forests, and it doesn't say basic forest, so that means the shock lands count, but the check lands don't. Temple Garden counts, but Sun Petal Grove does not. So I want to play a bunch of those shock lands with Gift of Paradise and Chromatic Lantern, and then I want to play a whole bunch of different finales. I want to play Mastermind's Acquisition to get whichever finale I want, and I want to cast cards like Hydroid Krasis and just go way over the top using Nissa Who Shakes the World as a personal mana flare to go nuts with. I think that is where this card will be a lot of fun. Is that a top tier deck? It is if the opponent isn't playing counter spells or a way to deal with Nissa in an effective way. If I can run a deck that means I untap with Nissa and then do absurdly broken stuff, that's pretty good. So I'm looking forward to seeing how Nissa Who Shakes the World can change the format, as it kind of adds a Wilderness Reclamation to sorcery speed effects, but only if you use forests to cast them. Paradise Druid is 1 and a green for a 2/1 Elf Druid at uncommon. It has hexproof as long as it is untapped. Tap for a mana of any color. I really like this card with one exception. Goblin Chain Whirler. Darn it. But perhaps the card would be too good without it in the format, because a card like this being able to come down and have hexproof as long as it's untapped, and therefore making sure you at least get to use it for mana once, is a pretty cool effect, and can now reliably ramp you from 2 mana to 4 mana on a consistent basis. So if that becomes what we're looking for, great. Also, the fact that I can add a mana of any color adds that fixing to green that we need to cast those other spells. It makes Rekindling Phoenix that much easier to play. It makes Ravenous Chupacabra that much easier to play. I'm really curious to see where Paradise Druid will fit into the current meta. Does the 1 toughness against a very commonly seen red deck keep it from making waves? Or will the red deck be pushed out by other cards and decks in the format and allow Paradise Druid to become a queen of midrange, like she may well be? Going off the butterflies and the look, I don't know gender for sure, don't judge me. I look forward to trying out the Paradise Druid, and you don't have a lot to lose to craft 4 of this uncommon. Ding dong, the witch is dead, the mean old witch, the wicked witch. Ding dong, the wicked witch is dead. And also, we can go and get the Ewoks and have them do their Endor dance. Now the Death Star has been blown up. We got a plane-wide celebration. 5 green sorcery rare. You may choose 4. You may choose the same mode more than once. Create a 2/2 citizen creature token that's all colors. In other words, make some babies. Return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So go rummaging for all the stuff and put it back on your shelves, I guess. Fix up your home. Proliferate. Sounds like making more babies to me. And you gain 4 life. So that's probably drinking and eating. Yeah, that's the proper celebration. So I know exactly what I'm going to do with this card. I'm going to play this against mono red and gain 16 life. Yeah. Not worried about anything else. I'm just going to gain 16 life. And I'm going to laugh. And I'm going to cackle insanely. Now, I mean, really, probably the best mode is to return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. If you can get back 4 permanents, say a Hydroid Krasis, a Planeswalker, a Jade Light Ranger, and a Wild Growth Walker, you're probably doing some really good stuff. And it's a little bit worth 7 mana at this point. I plan to craft exactly 1 of these and throw it in a deck here or there and just see what happens. I don't expect it to actually be good enough. This card is screaming to get negated. Like, it's just begging for you to negate it. 7 is so much for a sorcery. So I don't have a lot of hope, but I'll give it a shot. We'll see what happens. We will see what happens. Vivian, the Champion of the Wilds, is 2 and a green. She has 4 loyalty. She is rare. You may cast creature spells as though they had flash. That is the static ability. +1 until next turn. Up to 1 creature gains vigilance and reach. -2. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. Exile them one of them face down. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. For as long as it remains exiled, you may look at the card and you may cast it if it's a creature card. So the templating on the -2 is so that the opponent doesn't know which creature card you have because of the flash, right? It would make the flash a lot worse if you had to reveal the card and put it in your hand. But to make sure you're not cheating, and taking a card that you shouldn't, they are saying that you have to keep it separate from your hand and you may only cast it if it's a creature. That said, you can take something that's not a creature and just have it sitting over there as a bluff so that the opponent still has to at least think about it. I think that's all pretty unique templating, and I think it's pretty good. I think it's helpful. I think it's better than just saying you can't take a card. It's better than whiffing. It still plays mind games with the opponent. So I wish more things were templated this way. It's just a lot wordier. Let's break this down. You may cast creature spells as though they had flash. Pretty good. Drive the opponent pretty crazy. Good against a control deck. Can be good against a creature deck as long as Vivian survives a turn. +1. Until your next turn, up to 1 creature gains vigilance and reach. It's very unlikely this matters, like at all. It might come up some point. Maybe you need to block that Rekindling Phoenix or whatnot. But I'm not that enthused about that line of text at all. The good news is it goes straight to 5 loyalty as a 3-mana planeswalker, so it's a little harder to attack than most. I think the real power is in the -2 and flashing in your creatures. So this seems like a card that you sideboard in when your opponent is playing a counterspell deck and you want a turn 3 planeswalker threat rather than a turn 3 creature that's going to get swept up or in some other way messed with. So I see this as a sideboard card. I don't even know if I'm going to craft it because I'm not very enthusiastic about it. It just doesn't feel like a strong card to me. So I'll probably be leaving this one on the sidelines. Sorry, Vivian. Our final card today is Vivian's Arcbow. For 1 in a green, this is a rare legendary artifact. For the cost of X, discard a card. You may look at the top X cards of your library. You may put a creature card with converted mana cost X or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. I would like to like this card. It sounds really neat. I think that the only way this card is very good is if you have cards that you want to be discarding. So if I'm playing some kind of a Reanimator deck and I want to make sure that it always has fuel, maybe I want to be paying like a couple of mana to discard a card, and maybe I'll hit another creature, maybe I don't, but I get to put it in my hand if I get lucky and hit another creature, and that way I have a creature in my graveyard to use with my Reanimator spell, as opposed to having to save up 7 mana to cast my Block a Worm or something like that. In just a regular creature deck where this sits on the battlefield as sort of this way to filter land, I just don't think that's very good. Say you pay all your mana and you discard an extra land that you didn't need, and you go find another creature card, and you put it, let's see, at least you get to put it onto the battlefield. I guess that's the really good part of it. It doesn't go to your hand, it goes to the battlefield. But still, you discarded a card to make it happen. If the opponent kills it, you're down 2 cards, you 2 for 1 to yourself, plus the Arcbow itself. So this isn't a very exciting card to me. I think that the discarding a card has to be the big payoff, and maybe there's a place for 1 or 2 of it. It is also a legendary artifact, so there might be some historic significance to it if you're making a historic deck. Sorry to end on a bit of a downer, but I don't think that Vivian's Arcbow is where I really want to be. I don't even plan to craft this card until I see somebody do something uniquely amazing with it that I can't do with, say, a Charter Course, which I would feel much better about casting than Vivian's Arcbow. Okay, my friends, that brings us to the end of this epic set review video, which, please, you know what I love. You know it means a lot to me. If you leave me that comment that you watched the whole thing, it lets me know that it was all worth something. Hopefully we have a whole bunch of new friends that may have considered joining our Patreon or joining with the YouTube join button to support the channel. I hope so. When it's kind of scary to me to put in so many hours on a single project, not knowing if anybody will see it, so my fingers are crossed. And as I leave you, I want to thank you so much for the support. It might, to say it's life-changing, at this point it already is, but the direction that's going and the chance to really make my life about making Magic the Gathering content for all of you is so inspiring. It's what keeps me going every day and pushing forward. So let's take that journey together. Thank you so much for believing in me. The one thing I'll throw in on the end is that if you're watching this, it's probably really close to time for the War of the Spark pre-release event. Wizards of the Coast is giving me access to a stocked account for 24 hours to play War of the Spark before anybody else. And during that time, I have access to all of the cards. That starts on April 23rd at 7 a.m. Pacific time and ends on April 24th at 7 a.m. Pacific time. I will try to either be streaming or posting a video or two on YouTube during that time frame. I'll probably post 1 or 2 matches on YouTube just to show you that the event is live. I'll spend most of my time streaming on Twitch. But please come out, show some support, say hello. Just let me know that you're over here from YouTube so we can greet you. It's always a big competition between me and the hundreds of other streamers taking part in this event to see who's got the views. If you want to cast your vote for CGB, please come over, pop into the stream and say hello. Let me know that you're enjoying the content and that you're enjoying War of the Spark. Tell me your favorite card. Tell me when you started playing Magic. Tell me if your kids watch the videos. All this stuff means a lot to me. It makes my day. There will be other great content creators like Merchant, Professor Knox, all the people that you've come to know and love in the YouTube realm of MTGAA content as well as Twitch. So it's going to be a great time. Again, that's April 23rd. Come on over, check it out, and please say hello. Thank you for watching this video. As always, I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.